Meseches Nedarim Daf Chav begins with a Mishnah at the end of Daf Chav Zayin. Contains one additional Mishnah. The first Mishnah is discussing another case of someone who's forced to make a neder beyond his control. Here we're talking about where he says the neder in order to prevent an attacker from taking his property away. And the question of the Mishnah is, what type of neder is he allowed to say, and does he have to keep the neder afterwards? The Gemara will explain the Mishnah and compare it to a brisa. We'll get to our next Mishnah, which will talk about another example where somebody makes a neder that he doesn't mean, but here it's not going to be clear exactly why he doesn't mean it. The Gemara will discuss the Mishnah and explain it. So let's begin. First Mishnah discusses a situation where someone's being attacked, and he wants to make a neder in order to convince the attacker to leave him alone. So the Mishnah mentions three types of attackers. One is a murderer, another is a robber, and the third is a tax collector. Now, when the Mishnah talks about a tax collector, it does not mean taxes for the government to use for the benefit of the country. It means somebody who just intends to keep it for himself. There are two types of tax collectors in the days of Chazal. One was where the king gave him the right to take money from people, and therefore he took the money, used it for himself. The other is where somebody was not given a right by the king. He's just a strong guy, and he therefore makes people pay him to leave them alone. It's also a type of robber. The Gemara explains that is what we're referring to here. Now, in order to prevent this guy from taking his produce away, so the person in the Mishnah wants to make a neder to say that they are either truma or property of the king. These two things will dissuade the attacker from taking them from him. Now, if it's truma is going to keep the person from stealing them, obviously we're talking about a Jew, and we're also talking about someone who's more concerned with truma than he is with murdering, stealing, or taking taxes against people's will. But that is the case. So he wants to make a neder. Now, the neder is where he says, all the fruits in the world should be usher to me if this is not truma, or if it's not the property of the king. That's how he convinces the other person, he convinces the attacker that he's telling the truth. So the Mishnah rules that he's allowed to do that, and the Gemara will explain he doesn't have to keep the neder, and the Gemara will say why, because he was forced into making the neder, forced to some extent. He could have given up his fruits, but he was forced to some extent. Again, the Gemara will explain to what extent. Now we have three machlokes in Beis Hillel Meishamai, how far this permission to make these false nedarim, how far does this go? First machlok is does it work for a shul? Can a person swear? Now, he definitely cannot swear that they are truma or property of the king. That's a false shul that he's not allowed to do. But can he swear and say, I swear that I won't eat any fruits in the world if these are not truma or the property of the king? That's a machokas. Beis Shammai says he cannot use a shul. Shul is too strict to use for this. Shul, it says the Torah expresses lo yenakeh. It's very strict, so you can't use a shvur for this. A neder you could use. Beis Hillel says you could use not only a neder but also a shvur. Second machlokes is, are you allowed to offer the neder if the robber is not demanding it? According to Beis Shammai, no. Don't offer anything that he doesn't demand. So if he's willing to believe you, so try at least first to say that it belongs to the king or that it's truma without swearing anything, without trying to prove it by making the neder. Only if he demands and he says, I don't believe you, prove it by making a neder, then you're allowed to. Beis Hillel says no, he's allowed to go straight ahead and make the neder without being asked in order to convince the robber to leave him alone. The third machlok is very similar, is can he add, if the robber demands a neder right away, can he add to more than what the robber demands? So for example, if he wants to convince the robber to leave him alone, the robber says, make a neder that your wife won't have any hana from you if these aren't truma fruits. So the guy can say, my wife and my kids won't have any hana if it's not truma fruits. So is he allowed to add his kids into that? And let's say he did add his kids into that. So according to Beis Shammai, he wasn't supposed to. The fact that he did that doesn't count as a nidrei onzin, and it works. It's chal the neder on his kids, and they can't have enough from him. Going to Beis Hillel, no, it's okay that he added it. It's still called nidrei onzin. All right. The Gemara begins. The Gemara first wants to know, how does he have a right to get out of tax collecting? If somebody wants to collect the taxes, he has to pay the taxes. So the Gemara quotes Shmuel, says, Dina machusa dina, you have to pay the taxes that are being asked of you. The Gemara answers, this is talking about somebody who did not have rights to collect taxes. He just grabbed it on his own. The Gemara's second answer is we're talking about where he has rights, but there's no limit to how much he's allowed to collect. That is not something you can expect a person to stick to, so on that we don't say dina de malchus dina at all. Okay, next the Gemara wants to know, how does the neder work, how does it take effect, and what exactly is its validity? So the Gemara explains, the Gemara's first attempt is Rav Amram the name of Rav, and he says all the fruits of the world will be usher to me if these things don't belong to the king. So Gemara asks, he should have to stick to that. What does Nidrei Onsen help? You were forced into saying that. So what? You still said it. Even if you were forced into it, you made the neder. He shouldn't have a right to just violate the neder because he was forced into it. Now, had it been a real Nidrei Onsen that he was totally beyond his control, trying to explain, the Gemara would not have asked that. The issue here is that the only thing he was losing was his fruits. He wasn't forced on pain of murder. The guy just wanted to take his fruits away. So why does he have a right to make a neder and violate it? So the Gemara therefore says it can't be that he fully makes a neder. So what he just says is the fruits in the world should be also on me today, if I don't make the neder, or if the fruit isn't really truma. So therefore he's not violating the neder at all. Tomorrow he's going to eat the fruits. Now the Gemara says that can't be the explanation, because that wouldn't convince the robber. The robber would know that he's making a weak neder, which is not too difficult to stick to, because it's not true what he's saying. So Gemara answers, so actually what's happening is as follows. He says all the fruits of the world should be asur on me, and in his heart he thinks today. Now normally we say dvarim shavalev einam dvarim. We go by what you say, not by what you're thinking. And if you're thinking that I only mean today, but you said forever, or you didn't mention only today, so the neder is chal forever. However, since he's being placed under duress and he's trying to save his property, so in this situation we consider the fact that he was thinking today that's enough. So the fruits remain asur today, but then tomorrow it is okay. All right, now the Gemara goes deeper into the machlokas beis Hillel and beis Shammai. Again, we saw three machlokas beis Hillel and beis Shammai. The Gemara quotes a brisa which seems to conflict. The Gemara is going to give two ways to fit the brisa in. So the brisa quotes beis Shammai's opinion, and it says lo yiftach lo b'shvua. Beis Shammai says you can't start with swearing, and beis Hillel says you could start with swearing. So the Gemara understands that means that if the guy doesn't demand a shvua of you, you cannot volunteer to make a shvua. So Gemara says this contradicts our Mishnah for two reasons. First of all, in our Mishnah, beis Shammai says you can't swear at all, even if the guy starts. Second of all, in our Mishnah, beis Shammai says you can't start making a neder. If it says here that you can't start making a shvua, that implies that a neder you could start, because a neder is not such a big deal. So that conflicts with what the Mishnah says. So the Gemara therefore explains two answers. The Gemara's first answer is to say that really beis Shammai says you can't make a shvua at all, and even if you want to make a neder, you can't start making the neder. And that's why our Mishnah says that far to explain beis Shammai's opinion. This Mishnah over here talks about starting with a shvua to show that beis Hillel goes so far as to say you're even allowed to start with a shvua. Not only are you allowed to make a shvua, but you're even allowed to start a shvua. So if we would have just said our brisa, if we'd have just said our Mishnah, beis Hillel is only arguing beis Shammai about making a shvua when you're not starting, and about starting when it's nedarim. Here we go further and show that beis Hillel holds even to make a shvua you could start. Now that is it's a very wide machlokas between beis Hillel and beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says you cannot start nedarim and you can't even respond with a shvua. Beis Hillel says you can do both, and therefore we need to have the Mishnah and the brisa talk different cases so that becomes clear. Our second answer is to say you completely misunderstood the brisa. It's not talking about starting by making a shvua when you haven't been asked to. And it says lo yiftach lo b'shvua. It's talking about if somebody makes a shvua, is there a heter? Can he go to the chachamim and make a pesach to show that he regrets it and take the shvua off? That's what the argument is about. The beis Shammai says you can't take a shvua off with a pesach. There's no she'ela on a shvua. There's only she'ela on a neder. And beis Hillel says you can take it off. There is she'ela even on a shvua. Now begin the next Mishnah. And the Mishnah discusses two types of conditional nedarim. So the first is where somebody says these trees should be carbon, they should be asur, if they don't get cut down. Gemara explains he means they don't get cut down today. You cannot say these trees are also if they don't get it cut down ever, because every tree is going to fall at some point, and therefore the neder will never be fulfilled. But it means if they don't get cut down today, the day passed and they weren't cut down, therefore they become carbon, they become also, they become hektish. The Gemara explains is what is meant here. Now, the next example of the same type of neder is if he says this talus is carbon if it's not going to be burned. So again, he's referring to here it could mean that if it's not going to be burned ever, because there's no reason why you should say the talus is eventually going to be burned. So if it does not burn, then then it becomes hektish. Now here the Gemara again explains that we're talking about where it's being threatened by a fire, and the Gemara explains the chiddush of both of these is that they're being threatened. There's either a hurricane blowing and the tree's about to fall, so he says if it's not going to fall, then I'm going to, if it's not going to fall today, and he's referring to by this hurricane, then it becomes hektish. And about the talus, it's in a fire, and if he says if it doesn't get burned, then I'm going to make it hektish. In those two circumstances, it becomes hektish. Now the Mishnah's way of expressing that it's hektish is a bit odd. It says yesh lahem pidyon, they could be redeemed. Now this is because in the next case we're going to want to say ein lahem pidyon. The Gemara explains, when we say yesh lahem pidyon, we mean that they become hektish. And since they become hektish, they're like anything else which is not a carbon that becomes hektish. It has kedushas hadamim, its value belongs to hektish, and you can buy it off hektish. The kedusha transfers to the money then becomes hektish, and you take the object back in return. Now the second half of the Mishnah says as follows. Here he doesn't say if they don't get burned or get felled, the tree. He says that they are hektish until it gets cut down or until it gets burned. So here the Mishnah's psak is ein lahem pidyon, cannot be redeemed. So where it says, what does it mean ein lahem pidyon, it can't be redeemed? So there are two explanations. So first, and they're directly opposite. The first explanation is that they're not redeemable until they actually are cut down or burned. And the reason is because he says they're hektish until they are cut down or burned. So they will keep staying hektish. Even if you redeem it, it becomes hektish again right afterwards. It has a continuous hektish, a continuous makdish, as long as they haven't been burned or cut down yet. So they are not redeemable. Even if you try to redeem them, it doesn't take effect. That is until they are cut down or they're burned. Once they're cut down, then you now have the hektish has happened, but now it's not continual. And therefore, you can redeem it and take it back from hektish, but you do have to redeem it. That's Gemara's first explanation. That comes from Bar Pada. Whereas the Gemara's second explanation comes from Ula, and he says, no, what we mean to say is they don't have to be redeemed after they are cut down. The kedusha that was put on them runs from the time he says it until they're cut down or burned. He could redeem them during that time, it's no problem. But after that is over, the kedusha stops. It was a limited kedusha and it ends, and therefore he doesn't have to redeem them anymore. So until they are cut down, according to Bar Pada, you can't redeem them. According to Ula, you can. After they're cut down, according to Bar Pada, you have to redeem them, and it works. According to Ula, you don't even have to.